Welcome! I'm so glad you could join us today. We are jumping straight into the mind of one of history's absolute greatest authors. In this explainer, we're going to deconstruct the source material of his life to reveal the incredibly dark, brutal reality that fueled his absolute genius. Our focus today? Fyodor Dostoevsky and his personal wounds. Trust me, by the end of this, the way you look at human psychology is going to completely change. Let's get into it.
Now, you've probably seen quotes just like this one floating around online. If you scroll through any social media feed today, you are bound to hit a picture of Dostoevsky, the intense stare, the massive beard, paired with some incredibly wise, soothing quote. He's basically been turned into an internet quote machine. We use his words to add depth to pretty much anything, treating him like this ultimate, tranquil voice of internet wisdom. But here's the thing, there is a massive, honestly shocking disconnect between that sanitized image and who he actually was.
Because there's a world of difference between the internet philosopher we see today and the actual tortured genius. The reality of his life wasn't some peaceful, zen journey toward enlightenment, not even close. His everyday existence was a grueling, desperate cycle of extreme poverty, prison, illness, and constant humiliation. He didn't find his profound wisdom by meditating in a cozy parlor. He found it by dragging himself through literal hell on earth.
Section 1. The Wounds of Childhood.
To really understand Dostoevsky, you have to realize that his masterclass in human suffering started the exact minute he opened his eyes. And honestly, his early timeline is chilling. He was born in 1821 right on the grounds of the Mariinsky Hospital for the Poor, a public hospital for the destitute, the incurable, and the marginalized, where his father worked as a doctor. Just imagine being a little kid and your daily playmates are patients suffering from blindness, severe burns, or profound mental illness. Then at just 15 years old, he watches his mother die a slow, agonizing death. Barely a year later, his father completely spirals into alcoholism and dies under highly suspicious circumstances, most likely murdered by his own serfs. So before he was even an adult, poverty and madness were permanently hardwired into his psyche.
What really cemented his worldview, though, was the extreme contrast between his parents. On one hand, you have his mother, deeply gentle, poetic, the woman who taught him to read using the Bible and introduced him to concepts like faith and forgiveness. And then, on the other hand, his father, a strict, furious military doctor who cruelly beat his own peasants. Dostoevsky had a front-row seat to both the most profound cruelty and the purest grace, existing right there under the same roof.
And it is fascinating to see how that terrifying father figure bled straight into his greatest works. Think about the deeply flawed, alcoholic father figures in his novels, men capable of horrifying cruelty, yet also possessing this strange, pathetic tenderness. Whether it's Marmeladov in Crime and Punishment, General Ivolgin in The Idiot, or Fyodor in the Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky basically used literature as a mirror to confront the terrifying duality of his own father.
Section 2. The Firing Squad.
Moving into his young adulthood, a pretty naive decision ends up completely fracturing his reality. Desperate for company to escape his crushing depression, he joined a circle of revolutionary intellectuals, which turned out to be a very bad idea. He was arrested for treason. Picture this, he's standing in a freezing prison courtyard, wearing a condemned man's execution shirt. He is blindfolded, he's tied to a post. He hears the terrifying metallic clack of the firing squad cocking their rifles, and at the absolute last possible fraction of a second, a messenger from the Tsar arrives on horseback to announce his sentence has been commuted to hard labor in Siberia. He literally stared straight down the barrel of death.
Surviving that mock execution permanently broke his perception of time. In his novel The Idiot, he translates that exact trauma onto the page. He wrote, "I will have 1 minute to say goodbye, 1 minute to think of myself. What will I do with all these endless free minutes before me?" That brush with the firing squad left him with an almost painful gratitude for every single extra second of life, a theme that heavily haunts almost all of his future characters.
Section 3. Epilepsy, Debts, and Addictions.
But of course, surviving doesn't mean you're at peace. After returning from the Siberian prison camp, all that compounded trauma began to physically tear its way out of him. He developed crippling epilepsy. But the way he described his seizures is almost mystical. He wrote, "In a moment, like a lightning strike, I am flooded with light, a tranquility that the body cannot bear." He felt cursed by a condition that publicly humiliated him, yet simultaneously felt gifted with this blinding, divine flash of universal truth right before the convulsions hit.
Alongside his physical illness, he suffered from a devastating lack of impulse control.
This is hard to even wrap your head around. During a period of extreme poverty, a wealthy aunt gifted him 1,000 rubles. That was life-changing money, enough to live comfortably for an entire year. So what did he do? He blew the entire thing in a single night at the bars, discovered card games in the process, and sparked a ruinous, lifelong gambling addiction that would bankrupt him over and over again.
Which brings us to a frankly terrifying number, 26. Drowning in debt, he signed an absolutely suicidal contract with a loan shark. He had exactly 26 days to write an entire brand new novel. If he failed, the loan shark would seize the rights to all his past and future works for 9 years. 9 years. Under that unimaginable, suffocating pressure, he desperately dictated the novel The Gambler in under a month, directly pulling from the psychology of his own reckless addiction.
Section 4. The Tragedy of Fatherhood.
Now imagine this man. After the poverty, the Siberian prison, the epilepsy, the gambling, he finally marries the young stenographer who helped him write that book. He finally finds a sliver of love and stability. He becomes a father for the first time at 47 to a little girl named Sonia. And then, life hits him where it hurts the absolute most. His baby gets sick. He spends hours frantically trying to save her, begging, praying, until he watches a white rash form on her lips and she slips away. The visceral, heart-shattering horror of having to bury his infant daughter in a tiny white satin dress was a wound he never, ever recovered from.
This was his absolute rock bottom. But this ultimate loss was also the final catalyst. The sheer, blinding agony of losing his daughter shocked his system so violently that it finally broke his gambling addiction for good. It was out of that forced, grief-stricken sobriety that he finally pulled the pieces of his life together to write his most monumental masterpieces.
Section 5. The Ancestor of Psychoanalysis.
So how did the accumulation of all this horrific trauma allow a 19th century novelist to accurately map the human mind decades before science even caught up? Take the concept of the unconscious mind. As a kid, Dostoevsky watched a drunk, frustrated man violently beat a horse with a whip. That macabre memory burned into his brain. Decades later, in Crime and Punishment, his main character, Raskolnikov, has that exact same dream right before committing a murder. Dostoevsky was illustrating how our minds repress traumas and how they govern our darkest impulses, literally putting the unconscious mind into words way before psychology even had a name for it.
And he didn't stop there. Remember that toxic mix of love and hatred he had for his abusive father? By exploring that unresolved trauma in the Brothers Karamazov, a story about sons fighting the shadow of a toxic dad, he perfectly predicted psychoanalytic theories regarding the subconscious desire to overthrow the father figure. He stared straight into his own darkness and refused to blink.
The modern giants of psychology absolutely recognize this. Sigmund Freud himself wrote a comprehensive study called Dostoevsky and Parasite. Brilliant modern clinicians like Otto Kernberg have explicitly stated that their academic work basically just validates what Dostoevsky already proved using fictional characters. He practically invented modern psychology with nothing but a pen and paper.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question. Dostoevsky didn't just survive his traumas, he forged them into a microscope to examine the human soul. If his absolute darkest, most terrible wounds became the very key to understanding human psychology, it really makes you wonder, what hidden strengths, what unexpected wisdom might your own deepest struggles eventually reveal? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.